Shana Tova. Imagine for a moment, if you will, that you are an Israelite wandering through the rough and unforgiving desert. You are scared and exhausted, and then you are invited to participate in a building project, to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle where you will pray and gather as a community. Using all of the materials one could find within the community, along with all the skill and talent of the craftsmen, the craftspeople, and the artisans, and all the everyday folks, you build every aspect from the grandest altar until the smallest decoration. After what seems like an endless amount of time, the work is done. Then your leader Moses draws everyone together, takes a look around, sees all the work that has been completed, and offers a blessing. You feel so proud as you hear the words and look at the community and all it has accomplished. But you also realize that something sounds strangely familiar. Oh yeah, I remember this from the campfire. This is the exact same thing that happened when God finished the work of creation. Vayar Elohim, God saw, God looked. Malachto asher asa, at all the work that had been completed and done. Vayavarech Elohim, and God blessed all that was created. The exact same words. It could not be a coincidence. Moses must be trying to communicate an important message to us, that what we have built is as grand and as amazing and as important as creation itself. Our Mishkan was not just going to be a place to worship. It is a microcosm of the world we want to create. Wow. I share this story this morning because, like our ancestors, we are wandering in a seemingly endless and unforgiving desert. Despite our best hopes, we are still in the midst of a global pandemic, a pandemic that has laid bare and exacerbated the inequities and structural racism of our society. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, along with other kinds of hate and supremacy. And the threats of climate change have come quite literally to our doors, and we are grieving and afraid. It seems like every day we wake up and read something new and frightening. I share about the Torah of the Mishkan and its purposeful parallel to the creation story, because it is Rosh Hashanah, Hayom Harat Olam. Typically, Hayom Harat Olam is translated as today is the world's birthday. But more accurately, it translates to something like the world is pregnant today, or today the world is being birthed. On this holy day, we are reminded of our opportunity, of the opportunity to birth a new world into being. And I share this teaching because I believe, like the ancestors who carefully wrote and connected all the parts of the Torah, that one of the most vital, most powerful, and most hopeful things we can do to create the world we want to see is to build our Mishkan, our sanctuary. Now, I can imagine some of you are scratching your heads right now. If I am talking about the world that we want to see, shouldn't I be talking about where to give tzedakah, or the imperative of lowering our carbon footprint or welcoming refugees from Afghanistan? What about the urgency of protecting a woman's right to choose, especially in light of the draconian Texas abortion ban, which has the potential to set women's rights back and our country back a century? Of course, all of these things and more are critically important, but here's the thing. They are part of the same whole of building sacred community. For sacred community, if done right, is where we get the nourishment to do those very things and be sustained for the long term. It's where we get the koach to look despair in the eye and cast it to the ground again and again. Sacred community is where we can experience a sense of shleimut, of wholeness, that holds us when we are struggling and helps us feel more alive, present, and courageous. Since we have not all been physically together in 17 months, it is worth the reminder that this is what we are living into and striving for when we build our SAJ Mishkan. We are creating, we are building the world we want to see and the world we want our community's children to inherit. Here are some of the ways how. There are many more ways, but I'm going to highlight 4 of them briefly. First, we are building a world of compassion in which loving our neighbor as ourselves is an active practice. In contrast to those in our society who claim that their individual liberties are as important or more important than the health and safety of their neighbors, SAJ is committed to living the principle of ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving our neighbors as ourselves. Immediately after the lockdown in March 2020, our caring committee galvanized dozens of volunteers to make calls, ensuring that every single person was accounted for and that everyone was safe and supported. And during a time when we couldn't celebrate and mourn in the ways that we know how, our community worked tirelessly to support all of those whom we knew about going through personal transitions. Further, we actively train ourselves in compassion. We build the memory muscle of kindness and responsibility through prayer, meditation, and working on our midot, our qualities. Second, we are building a world that values thinking and questioning over obedience and willful ignorance. For years, many of us have been lamenting the post-truth era. But this year, we saw firsthand how dangerous it is when people believe what they believe because they have been told a lie or because they want it to be true. We have seen the violence that can come when facts become irrelevant. And on this point, I want to be really clear. I'm not just speaking about people in other parts of the country. I have seen this post-truth mentality in action during my advocacy with those experiencing homelessness in New York City. I have seen how people use lies and mistruths to justify and galvanize support for their position, and I've seen how people believe them without listening to the full story or hearing the facts. In contrast, at SAJ, we engage, we struggle with, we question, we criticize, we embrace, and we debate Torah. We match devotion to our sacred texts with respect for science and truth. And perhaps the most incredible part of this all is that this is the Judaism we are teaching our children in our school program and our teen program, where we encourage the pursuit of questions over answers, and we encourage a healthy skepticism of authority. I can tell you that this is very different than the Hebrew school I grew up in, and I'm sure many of you feel the same. In fact, our kids are leading the way. Recently, a conversion student told me that she made the final decision to become Jewish after attending an SAJ B mitzvah. In that B mitzvah, the student, the girl, the person leading our service and our Torah discussion, she called out a problematic passage of the Torah as sexist and wrong at the start of her words. And this conversion student said to me, if this is what it's like to be part of the covenant, I want in. Third, we are building a world that affirms the dignity of each person and inspires us to bend the arc towards justice. SAJ engages its members to support formerly incarcerated folks, immigrants and refugees, those experiencing food insecurity, and those who have been disenfranchised. While the study of America's history with slavery and white supremacy is contested, SAJ members self-organized a new iteration of the Racial Justice Reading Group, which is going to continue in an expanded form next year. While folks in Texas and around the country have been working the past years to ban abortion in the name of religion, SAJ members have been praying with their feet, escorting outside a Bronx abortion clinic to support women exercising their reproductive freedom and what should be their basic healthcare needs. Now, we haven't been able to be at the clinic because of COVID in a while, but we will be back. This past year, I was able to be a leading voice of the faith community in support of those experiencing homelessness. And my ability to galvanize the community on this and other activist work and our community's ability to do so has, of course, diminished a little bit during COVID. But during my work, I brought you in my heart. And I know that we are going to find meaningful ways to work together as a community as we can gather more safely, when we can gather more safely, especially because this moment of crisis demands a response. Fourth, we are creating a world where diversity is our strength, and all are invited to contribute to the ongoing revelation of Torah. We at SAJ are seekers and non-believers alike, families with children and without children, single, married, young, old, white, black, Asian, Latino, gay, straight, transgender, non-binary, Jews by choice, by birth, and also people of other faiths living in Jewish households. This is not an accident. We actively work to make sure that those in our gates and those who may not feel that they could enter yet can feel seen and celebrated and welcomed in. An example, in the fall, a father contacted me about 2 months before what would have been his child's bar mitzvah. The father told me that the child had just came out as non-binary and changed their pronouns to they and them. And now he sounded really nervous on the phone. He asked, is it okay to go ahead with the bar mitzvah? What do we need to change? What do we need to do? And I burst out joyfully. Absolutely nothing. The ceremony, the language, the calls from the Torah, the words we use in our weekly email bulletin. We have spent the last year working so that the B mitzvah celebration is open to anyone of any gender identity. Nothing changes, and we cannot wait to celebrate them at their B mitzvah. I share this not only because it's a feel-good story, which it is, but also to state that the work that we do matters. This example of inclusivity comes against a backdrop of a rise in the attack of transgender rights, with more than 100 bills in 33 states trying to curb those rights. And while the Jewish community is generally more open-minded, not all are ready and willing to do the work of educating themselves and making real change. That phone call or that simcha, that celebration, could have been an experience of pain, rejection, perhaps even an end to the relationship of Judaism. But instead, it was a moment of belonging and blessing. This January, we begin a year-long celebration of SAJ's centennial year. And at this seminal moment, it is vital that we remember that while the challenges we face are unique in 2021, we are not the first group of SAJers to imagine a radically different future than the one that they inherited. Dr. Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, our founding rabbi, left the Jewish Center because he was questioning Torah, rethinking God, and major concepts of Jewish life, and he needed the space and freedom to do that. He had the notion, which we now take for granted, but I promise at the time it was new, that one should not have to check your head, your brain, at the door of the synagogue or sanctuary when you enter in. And while Dr. Kaplan was not an activist out in the streets, he was an ethicist who consistently called out tyranny and the abuse of power, who advocated in support of workers and unions in the presence of factory owners. And Kaplan's initiation of the bat mitzvah is the model par excellence for changing Jewish ritual in order to expand greater access to Torah. When Kaplan left the Jewish Center, bat mitzvah was on his mind. He was deeply moved by the women's suffrage movement, and he knew that women's roles in Judaism needed to change. Now, SAJ held its first meeting on January 17th, 1922. Just 2 weeks later, on February 5th, Kaplan went to the board of directors, newly formed, with the proposal that this congregation initiate the rite of bat mitzvah. Just 6 weeks later, Judith Kaplan Eisenstein became the first woman in American Jewish history to have a bat mitzvah. Now, I have heard rumblings and criticisms, even from Judith's family, that the first bat mitzvah is a little overrated. Judith was told by her father to prepare an additional Torah reading the night before her father called her up. No year of meaningful preparation, no invitations, no special dress. Judith joined the men's section. Yes, you heard that right, the men's section at SAJ. She did not ascend to the bima, but she stood up in her seat to chant the verses. Yes, Judith's experience is nothing what young girls have today. Thank goodness. But it is still true that this barrier-breaking moment changed everything. Because once bat mitzvah was initiated, it ignited nothing short of a revolution of egalitarianism in Jewish life. Once girls ascended to the bima, they got a taste, and they wanted more. Girls and women began to fight for greater access, and soon girls and women were leading prayers, sitting on synagogue boards, becoming synagogue presidents, and eventually becoming rabbis. It is also critical to note this gender revolution in Judaism has opened the door for access to other groups on the margins: Jews by choice, LGBTQ Jews, those in interfaith households, Jews of color, and has provided a framework for a Judaism that actively seeks to bring those on the margins to the center. And we can trace it all back to the radical idea that started at SAJ, that if we open the tent, Judaism and all of us will be better for it. As we celebrate our 100th anniversary, alongside the commitments to building a world of responsibility, questioning, justice, and radical welcome, Let us lift up and claim the spirit of SAJ's innovative, daring, and radical history. Let us be bold and dream big as we envision the next 100 years. And let us ask the hard questions about the changing realities of contemporary life and the importance of community. Let's strengthen our practice of joyful and thoughtful Judaism that impacts us, and even more importantly, impacts the present and future children of SAJ who are going out into the world as they age and become adults to shape the future of Judaism and the broader world as we know it. And all the while, let us hold in our hearts that lesson that Moses taught our ancestors when they were wandering in the desert. That sacred community has incredible power and potency. It is a microcosm of creation. It is where we build the world we want to see. Let's get to work. Shana Tova.